Hello, on behalf of Sigma-HSE, thank you for joining us for our webinar on PHA revalidations today. We want to give everyone an opportunity to jump into the session, so we will get started in approximately 2 minutes. Hello again, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on process hazard analysis revalidations. I am Mark Yukich, U.S. Technical Development Manager at Sigma-HSE, and I will be your host today. I have approximately 10 years of process safety industry experience. That experience includes combustible dust, flammable vapors, and chemical reaction hazards, and steps to mitigate those hazardous materials while in process. I'd like to be able to take the time to understand the pain points for our customers related to process safety. If we don't have the option to assist, I want to ensure we hand you off to a team that we trust to bring value to your safety team. Please feel free to contact me should you ever need any assistance. Sigma-HSE is a global engineering firm with technical experts supporting companies around the world by providing actionable solutions to protect, enhance, and optimize their process. Our goal is to allow your team to focus on what really matters: protection for your people, business, workplace, and the environment. In this webinar, we will discuss an overview of PHA revalidations. Some highlights include why revalidations are required under PSM, types of revalidations, and how to identify and address common omissions. We will have time for Q&A at the end of the session. Feel free to add questions to that question section during the training, and we'll try to address those questions at the end of our program. Doug Gruder will be our process safety consultant leading our discussion today. Doug, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you for everybody on the webinar who took the time to visit with us on this Juneteenth day. My name is Doug Gruder. I'm a senior process safety consultant with Sigma-HSE. I have over 28 years of experience in operations, EHS, process safety, and programming. Focusing a little more on the process safety aspect, I've done a number of different studies. You can see all of the studies there, and we're expanding that category. What we're going to be talking about today are PHA revalidations. We're going to talk about why they're necessary and the timing of them, which OSHA does mandate. Different types of revalidations. The scope the revalidation should include, their context, objectives, changes, incident investigations, and omissions and deficiencies. We're going to dive into these categories a little deeper during this presentation. Why do we do revalidations? Well, it's required by OSHA in the US, and they must occur every 5 years. Also in Europe, Cerveza has a requirement where they're a little more vague, but periodically a review needs to be done and a safety report written. How do we time revalidations? Well, the 5-year starting point can be from any of the following. It can be from the first PHA session to the revalidation, the last PHA session to the revalidation, when the report of the previous PHA was written, or when management accepted the previous PHA. The key here is once you pick a starting point, it must stay consistent throughout the life of the process. There are a few different kinds of revalidations that we can do. One is called a simple update. And this is done when there are only minor changes to the process. Documentation requirements may have changed. The second type is a retrofit. And this would be when you had added or deleted a node, implemented a new risk ranking method, or you need to add or revisit human factors or facility siting. The third type is more extensive and is called a redo. It's a replacement revalidation. This needs to be done when the previous PHA has significant errors or omissions, or the process has changed significantly since the last PHA, and that would be evidenced by a large number of changes or complex changes. The third time a revalidation replacement needs to be done is if the previous PHA documentation is lost and not available. And I've seen this happen also. So how do we know which of the three types of revalidations we should be using? Usually a company will have developed a checklist. The previous PHA should be audited against that checklist. And if the company's criteria is not met, a redo should be completed. Another situation that we see frequently today is when a company is acquired by another company, and the company that was acquired did not do their PHAs according to the new company's criteria. So some guidance regarding the purpose, scope, and objectives. The revalidation PHA should not just be a rubber stamp of the previous PHA. The previous PHA will need to be reviewed, and a number of things need to be considered. Additional purposes. Have the boundaries of the covered process changed? Have the utilities supplying heating or cooling or venting changed? Are all the multiple nodes incorporated? Are there any new operating modes and additional hazards? And we'll go into a little different, more in-depth analysis of additional hazards later in the presentation. When you're doing a revalidation, related studies will also need to be revalidated, such as facility siting, the human factors checklist. Did we build a new control room, which is more isolated from the process? Have the procedures changed? Or have the control system interlocks changed? Have we moved from a basic process control system interlock to a safety instrumented system interlock? The content of the revalidation plan needs to include any process changes, new requirements, omissions and deficiencies from the previous, any incidents, management of changes, new technology or information. A lot of times during the 5-year period, new technology will be developed and could be better for your process safety, and any number of regulations that may have changed. The objectives are to produce an updated PHA that adequately addresses process hazards as they currently exist. Process changes may have introduced new hazards, or they may have added additional layers of protection, which reduces the likelihood of an event occurring. Are there any changes in the off-site receptors? Have any parks, nursing homes, child care centers been built around the site? That needs to be considered also. Have there been changes in the environmental or process safety standards in that 5-year period? So the objective of the revalidation is to review the same issues of the previous PHA, add any omissions from the previous PHA, review the consequences. You're also going to need to look at are the recommendations made in the previous PHA complete? And do those recommendations reduce the risk to the company's acceptable risk levels? Another thing that's usually overlooked is, do the recommendations introduce any new hazards? So what changes are we talking about? Changes that are covered under the MoC process which require a pre-startup safety review. Does the PSSR have the required process safety information? Any changes which may have resulted from an incident or event investigation, were those recommendations updated and included? Of course, any changes to the P&IDs and area classifications need to be reviewed. And these include actually walking out in the field and ensuring that the P&IDs are as built. A review of the standard operating procedures and maintenance procedures, and a review of engineering projects for new capital equipment. Have all those requirements been met? Some possible impacts of changes could include new hazards, or they could have removed hazards. Do they make existing hazards worse or less? Or did the changes have no effect on the hazards? It's required that changes follow a management of change procedures. Those changes that did go through the management of change and pre-startup safety review program should be reviewed. Sometimes changes get made on the fly and may not have gone through the management of change or the pre-startup safety review process. Those also need to be looked at. We don't generally include open or pending management of change. Those will be covered during the next revalidation or during that change's pre-startup safety review. We should also look at incidents or events. Incidents should be formulated into scenarios and the appropriate safeguards added. And we do that to ensure that the incident investigation actually did make recommendations which bring the scenario into an acceptable envelope based on the company's risk criteria. Of course, in 5 years, you'll be working on recommendations from the previous PHA. Those recommendations should be reviewed, and if completed, moved from the recommendation to the safeguard column, if completed. The appropriate risk reduction credit should be given to each safeguard. That is their probability of failure on demand. Next, we're going to talk about reviewing omissions and deficiencies from the previous PHA. These were items that were required at the time, but were missed. Could include incomplete consideration or documentation of the design intent, of deviations, facility siting, errors and omissions, previous incidents and near misses that were not included, scenarios that include failure of key safeguards, utility failures that were not included or completely studied, and then some administrative items such as process safety information was incorrect or inaccurate, or the process hazard analysis was not properly documented. These hazard analyses are very important because if anything were to happen, any significant events were to happen, OSHA would come in, and one of the first things they would ask for is the process hazard analysis. In that light, it is a legal document that can be used in a court of law. Some other omissions and deficiencies would include the missing items. Again, the PHA team leader must have been qualified. Process subdivisions must have been appropriate. Maybe there was no or incomplete treatment of external events. Maybe propagating and external events were not captured. And a number of times you'll say that a safeguard is taken as a credit when it is subject to a common cause failure. That should not be an additional safeguard. And finally, a lot of companies now are requiring quality and food safety scenarios to be included in the PHA. Moving on to new information. New information that should be incorporated into the revalidation include any reactivity data that you may have gotten since the last PHA, any combustible dust testing, any lessons that have been learned. A lot of these come from the operating personnel in the facility. The Center for Chemical Process Safety issues a process safety beacon on a monthly basis. And that gives things that have happened in the industry. And you want to make sure that if you have a similar situation, you cover those and put in layers of protection to prevent them or adequately mitigate them. If your company has PSM training, that could alert the operators to something they may not have thought of, which may be brought up in the revalidation PHA. Same thing with environmental safety alerts that are issued by a number of companies. We can also talk about the use of new or better technology. As I said previously, a lot of technology can be developed in that 5-year period. If it's new, it may serve the purpose of mitigating a hazardous scenario better than what you currently have in place. It may also improve layers of protection. And one example would be switching an interlock from a basic process control system to a safety instrumented system interlock, which ensures the probability of failure on demand. And we do have a webinar recorded on that on our websites. We also want to identify new requirements. And those can be got from reviewing equipment or operational codes and standards, such as the one for safety instrumented systems, environmental or occupational standards and regulations, process safety codes and standards, and RAGAGAP, generally recognized and accepted good engineering practices. You can also get some new requirements, maybe from an internal corporate guideline, and that may be the case, especially if your facility was just purchased by a different company. Regulatory guidelines and the Center for Chemical Process Safety guidelines. These should be reviewed along with local, federal, OSHA and Cerveso requirements and incorporated into your revalidation PHA. In summary, all PHA revalidations must be considered based on the previous PHA scope, its depth and completeness. Typically, this is done with an internal company checklist to determine which type of revalidation is required. Attention should be given to the extent of the changes and regulations, incident investigations, or event investigations, which may indicate that your previous safeguards were not effective, or the recommendations made during the investigations were not effective, usually subject to common cause failures, and that your management of change process may not have been correctly implemented. And that would include a pre-startup safety review after a management of change. At Sigma, we can support all of your PHA and revalidation needs. And that includes a number of different types of PHAs, from preliminary risk assessments to your 5-year revalidation. We have over 25 years of experience in a number of different industries. And our methodology is a pragmatic approach. And we customize the methodology to ensure the PHA is effective, both from identifying risks Now I'm going to turn it over to Mark for any questions that we may have.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate it. And once again, if you have any questions, certainly feel free to add them to the questions section on the right, and we will work on getting you an answer. Doug, one question here is, if my company does not have a PHA audit checklist, how should I determine what type of revalidation is required?
Yeah, that's a good question. It usually causes some confusion, but you should look at the changes and determine if they were significant. If the team that you had was experienced, and have there been any events which may indicate that the PHA was missing procedures or safeguards.
All right. How about, why are revalidations important?
Well, OSHA requires them so that you keep an eye on any situations that may cause an event or an incident. Sometimes the original team of the previous PHA may have been less experienced, both on the process engineer side or on the operator side. These operators are very important in a PHA. You especially need to have operators and instrument technicians that'll tell you how things are actually done instead of how they are supposed to be done. Everybody knows how they're supposed to be done. That's why we have standard operating procedures. But an experienced enabled operator will tell you about the shortcuts that they may take when doing a procedure. Just because it may be easier. Maybe the operators can't get to the valves you want them to close that easily. So they close a different valve, which could put them at risk.
All right, thank you. Another one here is, why do I have to do a new facility siting study if nothing has changed?
That's that's a good question. It's very seldom that over a 5-year period, nothing has changed, right? The people that are in the revalidation, as highlighted by the last question, may be more experienced. They may have more time to do the revalidation, and they weren't under a time constraint to finish it in a certain period of time, which would make it a better, more complete study.
Excellent, thank you. One other one here is, why should incidents or events be included?
Yeah, that they should be included as scenarios, and that's to ensure that the recommendations were completed and they were effective. In the past, I've seen multiple similar events happen that had the same root cause, and that would indicate that the investigation was inadequate or the probability of failure on demand of the recommendations was exaggerated. We also have to remember that the recommendations have to be independent and not subject to common cause failure. And they were sufficient to reduce the risk to the company's acceptable risk criteria. If you have an event with an initiating cause of human error, writing a procedure is a common cause failure and will not prevent that event from occurring again.
All right, thank you. One other one here is who should be on the revalidation team?
First, you need a qualified PHA team leader. Those are, that's the person who will direct the team in their actions during the sessions. You also need to have a stable team roster. You can't have, or you should, 5 different operators coming on 5 different sessions. And the operator, I think, is one of the most important people on a PHA team. Because, like was said in response to another question, a good operator will tell you how things are actually done and not how they should be done. And then you'll need a safety and environmental person. And they can give you the safety, injury, or environmental insults. And they know the applicable laws and regulations.
All right, thanks, Doug. Another one here is if a company is diligent by using by updating during the 5 years period, would you agree that the revalidation would be a confirmation and review of external changes, such as regulatory and incidents outside of the process?
Yeah, and that's one of the benefits of having a diligent team, right? If you're capturing the changes and you're incorporating them as you go into the PHA, then you won't have to go all the way to a redo type of validation. You can go to one of the 2 lower levels, one of which is a review.
All right, thank you. Another question here is it recommended that a different consulting company revalidate the study that was performed previously?
It's always a good idea to get another set of eyes on it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a different company, but a different group of people for sure would be helpful. Yeah, some people get locked into a mode of thinking that a new set of eyes may be able to identify additional hazards or additional safeguards that you have. And I think, Mark, that's one of the things that is good with one of the services we provide, not only a HAZOP PHA, but a HAZOP LOPA combined PHA. And I think this is a good time to talk a little bit about what we see on the screen now. Sigma-HSE has a lot of webinars that are free. And any of our guests at this webinar, just log on to the website and you can watch them at your convenience.
And actually, and also on that note, Doug, just a reminder to the group here, we will be sending out. I'll send out personally the link to the playback of this webinar. So with that, I think appreciate everyone's time in joining us today. And should you ever need assistance with testing and process safety support, please feel free to contact us at info-us@sigma-hse.com. And we look forward to being a resource to you. And thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, I'd also like to thank everybody who's in attendance for taking the time out of their day to review this webinar with us. Hope you found it insightful and useful.
Thanks, everybody.